Have you ever made a snapped judgment and then like 5 minutes later you're kicking yourself for it? Or maybe you've stared at a simple brain teaser and just felt completely stuck. Well, it turns out your mind isn't this single logical computer. It's more like a play with two very different characters in charge. Today we're diving deep into the surprising and sometimes just plain weird ways our minds actually work, all based on Daniel Kahneman's incredible book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
But before we get into all the theory, I want to try a little something. Let's start with a quick puzzle. This is going to show you, not just tell you, exactly what we're talking about. You ready?
All right, take a second. Don't pull out a calculator. Don't overthink it. Just what's the very first answer that pops into your head? Seems pretty simple, right? I'm going to guess you thought 10 cents. Am I right? If you did, don't worry. You're in very good company. That's the answer that feels right. It's quick, it's easy, and it just pops into your head almost automatically. But it's also wrong. The correct answer is actually 5 cents. Yeah, 5. Let's walk through it real quick. If the ball is 5 cents and the bat costs $1 more than the ball, that makes the bat $1.05. And what's $1.05 plus 5 cents? Boom, $1.10. This little puzzle right here is the perfect example of this constant battle happening inside our heads. So why do our brains so easily fall into that trap? Well, it's because what you think of as your mind isn't just one thing. It's this drama, like we said, run by two completely different systems. So I think it's about time we meet them.
Kahneman gives these two modes of thinking pretty simple names, System 1 and System 2. Now, these aren't literal physical parts of your brain. Think of them more like characters that help us understand who's doing the thinking at any given moment.
Okay, so on one side, you have System 1. This is the star of the show, our impulsive hero. It's lightning fast, totally automatic, and runs on intuition. It's what lets you instantly know that 2 plus 2 is 4, or recognize a friend's face in a crowd. It operates effortlessly. Then you've got System 2. This is the careful, thoughtful logician. It's slow, deliberate, and it takes real, conscious effort. This is the part of your brain you have to fire up to solve a tricky math problem, or to double-check the answer to that bat and ball puzzle.
So how do these two work together? Well, you can think of it like this. System 1 is constantly generating suggestions for System 2. Impressions, intuitions, feelings. System 2 is supposed to be the careful editor that steps in, checks the facts, and makes the final decision when things get tough.
But here's the huge catch. System 2 is lazy, like really lazy. Our brains are hardwired to conserve energy, to follow the path of least resistance. So way more often than we realize, the careful System 2 just says, looks good to me, and accepts the quick, easy, and sometimes totally wrong answer from System 1. And that right there is where we get into all sorts of trouble. So what happens when we let our fast-thinking, impulsive System 1 run the show without any adult supervision from System 2? Well, we start making these predictable, systematic mistakes. Psychologists have a name for them: cognitive biases.
Let's start with a really fascinating one called priming. This is where just being exposed to a word, an image, or an idea can influence your later actions and thoughts, all without you having any clue that it's happening. It's like your brain is getting these little invisible nudges all day long.
And the research on this is just wild. For example, in one famous study, college students who were just asked to unscramble sentences with words related to old age, like Florida, wrinkle, bingo, they actually walked more slowly down the hallway afterward, and they had no idea why. In another, just thinking about money made people act more selfishly and less willing to help someone. It's a bit spooky, right?
All right, next up is a bias you've definitely seen in action, the anchoring effect. This is our brain's weird tendency to latch onto the very first piece of information we get, the anchor, and use it as a reference point for everything that comes after, even if that first piece of information is completely random.
Think about buying a car or a house. The seller throws out a super high asking price. You know it's too high, but that number is now stuck in your head. It's the anchor. So when you negotiate them down from there, the new price feels like a great deal, even if it's still more than the house is actually worth. Your System 1 just got anchored to that initial number.
This quote from Kahneman is one of my favorites, and it perfectly sets up our next big failure of thinking. Sometimes when we focus really hard on one thing, we can become completely blind to something else that's happening right in front of our faces.
You might have heard of the invisible gorilla experiment. It's a classic. People are asked to watch a video of two teams passing basketballs and count the passes made by one team. It requires focus, right? Your System 2 is hard at work.
Well, in the middle of the video, a person in a full-body gorilla suit walks into the center of the screen, thumps their chest, and walks off. And the crazy part? About half of the people watching are so focused on counting that they don't see the gorilla at all. It's a powerful reminder that we're missing a lot more than we think.
Okay, we're going to shift gears now to the last big idea from the book. And honestly, this one might be the most profound. It turns out, just like you have two systems of thought, you also have two different selves that interpret your life.
So, let's meet your two selves. First, there's the experiencing self. This self lives completely in the present. It's the part of you that feels pain, pleasure, joy, or boredom from moment to moment. It's just what is happening right now. But then you've got the remembering self. This self is the storyteller. It doesn't keep a perfect record of every moment. Instead, it creates stories about your experiences, and it pays special attention to the most intense moments, and crucially, how things end.
Kahneman came up with a really clever and kind of mean experiment to show this in action. Okay, so in the first part, trial A, people had to stick their hand in painfully cold water for 60 seconds. Not fun. In trial B, they did the exact same thing for 60 seconds, but then they had to keep their hand in for an extra 30 seconds while the water warmed up by just 1 degree. So it was still unpleasantly cold, but just a tiny bit less painful at the very end.
Now, here's the kicker. After they did both trials, they were asked which one they would be willing to repeat. Logically, you'd choose trial A, right? It's 30 seconds less of pain. But a shocking 80% of people chose to repeat trial B, the one with more total pain. Why? Because the remembering self, the storyteller, just cared that it had a slightly better ending.
This is what Kahneman calls the tyranny of the remembering self. The part of you that makes your choices for the future, your remembering self, doesn't really care about the reality of your moment-to-moment experience. It doesn't pay attention to how long something lasted. All it cares about is the story it tells itself afterward, especially how that story ends.
Just let that sink in for a minute. A fantastic 2-week vacation that ends with a canceled flight and a miserable day at the airport might be remembered as a bad trip. A tough, stressful project that ends with a huge success is remembered as a great experience. The story we keep is way more powerful than the reality we lived.
And that leaves us with this final, really important question to ask ourselves. When you're making big life choices about your career, about your relationships, about what will make you happy, who are you really making them for? Are you making them for the self that has to live through every single moment? Or are you making them for the storyteller in your head, the one that just keeps the memories?